Where are you watching from right now? Before we dive into one of Victorian England's most baffling maritime mysteries, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? Are you near the ocean or far inland? We absolutely love connecting with our community across the globe. Imagine vanishing from your ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean during a violent storm. Your crew searches for hours but finds nothing. They declare you lost at sea. Your family holds a memorial service. Your name is added to the list of sailors claimed by the ocean. And then, 3 weeks later, you're found walking barefoot along the English coast, wearing clothes that aren't yours, speaking words that make no sense, with no memory of where you've been or how you survived. This isn't fiction. This is the documented case of Captain Amelia Worthington and the merchant vessel HMS Triumph, a mystery that captivated Victorian England and remains unexplained nearly 150 years later. The captain who defied every expectation. In 1879, Captain Amelia Worthington was 38 years old and one of the most respected maritime captains in England. In an era when women were expected to stay in drawing rooms and manage households, Amelia commanded a 3-masted merchant ship crossing the Atlantic with a crew of 24 men. She hadn't inherited her position through family connections or married into it through a wealthy husband. Amelia had earned her captain's license through sheer determination, exceptional skill, and an almost supernatural ability to navigate treacherous waters. She had started as a cabin girl at age 14, working on her uncle's coastal trading vessel. By 25, she had passed her master examination, one of only 3 women in all of England to hold such a certificate. The HMS Triumph was her pride and joy, a sturdy merchant vessel that carried textiles, manufactured goods, and occasionally passengers between Liverpool and Boston. Amelia had captained the Triumph for 8 years without a single serious incident. Her crew respected her. Her passengers praised her, and maritime authorities acknowledged, however grudgingly, that she was one of the finest navigators working the Atlantic routes. She was also fiercely independent, unmarried by choice, and utterly devoted to the sea. Her sister Margaret often said that Amelia belonged more to the ocean than to land, that she seemed more comfortable on a pitching deck in a gale than in a peaceful English garden. That observation would prove more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. The voyage that changed everything. On September 3, 1879, the HMS Triumph departed Liverpool with a cargo of manufactured goods, wool textiles, and 12 passengers bound for Boston. The weather forecast was reasonable for early autumn. The ship was in excellent condition. The crew was experienced and loyal. Everything suggested a routine crossing. Amelia's personal log from the first week of the voyage recorded standard observations: wind speeds, course adjustments, passenger complaints about seasickness, and routine maintenance. Her entries were professional, detailed, and unremarkable. September 3rd, departed Liverpool 1400 hours. Weather fair, winds westerly. All passengers settled. Crew performing excellently. Estimate arrival Boston September 18. September 5. Steady progress. Encountered merchant vessel Seafarer, exchanged greetings. All well aboard. September 8. Barometer falling. Preparing for potential weather system. Passengers advised to secure personal items. And then, on September 10th, the weather turned deadly. The storm that hit the HMS Triumph on September 10, 1879, was recorded by multiple ships in the area as one of the most violent North Atlantic tempests of that year. Winds exceeded 70 knots, waves reached 40 feet, visibility dropped to near zero. Several ships reported damage, and at least 2 smaller vessels were lost with all hands. The Triumph, being a sturdy and well-maintained vessel commanded by an exceptional captain, weathered the storm better than most. But even the best ships and captains can't control everything the ocean throws at them. According to the testimony of First Mate Thomas Blackwell, Captain Worthington was on the bridge throughout the worst of the storm, personally commanding the ship's response to the massive waves. She had been at her post for nearly 16 hours straight, refusing to leave even when other officers offered to relieve her. At approximately 0200 hours on September 11th, a wave larger than any they had yet encountered struck the HMS Triumph's port side. The impact was so violent that it shattered the bridge windows and swept water across the deck. In the chaos and darkness, with the ship rolling heavily and water pouring through broken glass, no one saw exactly what happened to Captain Worthington. When the immediate danger passed and the crew regained their bearings, they realized their captain was gone. The search that found nothing. First Mate Blackwell immediately ordered a search of the entire ship. Every compartment was checked. Every possible location where someone could have been washed or thrown was examined. Crewmen called out her name over and over. Lanterns were lit and swung over the sides of the ship, hoping to spot someone in the water. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of what had happened or where she had gone. The storm was still raging, with winds and waves making any extended search impossible. Blackwell made the agonizing decision that any captain would have made. He ordered the ship to continue on course toward Boston. To turn back in those conditions would have endangered the entire vessel and everyone aboard. They couldn't save someone who was already gone. The HMS Triumph arrived in Boston on September 19, 9 days later than expected due to storm damage and repairs. First Mate Blackwell reported the loss of Captain Worthington to maritime authorities. The ship's log, the testimony of crew members, and the physical damage to the bridge all corroborated the account. Captain Amelia Worthington had been lost at sea during a severe storm on September 11, 1879. Official notice was published in maritime registers and newspapers. Captain Amelia Worthington, commander of HMS Triumph, lost at sea during Atlantic storm, September 11, 1879, presumed drowned. Memorial service to be held in Liverpool upon vessel's return. The notice was published on September 24, 1879. By that date, something impossible had already happened back in England. The fisherman's discovery. On the morning of October 2, 1879, 3 weeks after Captain Worthington disappeared from her ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a fisherman named Robert Hughes was walking along the coast near Cornwall, checking his nets and crab pots along the rocky shoreline. Cornwall is on the southwestern tip of England, approximately 250 miles from Liverpool and several hundred miles from where the Triumph had been when the storm hit. It's a region of dramatic cliffs, hidden coves, and treacherous coastal waters that have claimed countless ships over the centuries. As Hughes walked along a particularly isolated stretch of beach, he spotted what he initially thought was a drowned body washed up by the tide. He approached cautiously, expecting to find a corpse that would need to be reported to authorities. Instead, he found a living woman sitting on the rocks, staring out at the sea. She was barefoot, wearing a man's oversized coat over what appeared to be a nightgown or undergarment. Her hair was tangled and matted with salt. Her face was weathered and sunburned. She appeared thin, almost emaciated, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. But she was alive, breathing, conscious. Hughes approached carefully, calling out to ask if she needed help. The woman turned to look at him, but didn't respond. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, as if she was looking at something far beyond the horizon. "Miss, are you hurt?" Hughes tried again. "Do you need assistance? How did you come to be here?" The woman opened her mouth and spoke, but what came out made no sense. She was speaking English, but the words were disconnected, fragments that didn't form coherent thoughts. "The water speaks, walking beneath. 20 days or 20 years. The cold knows my name." Hughes, concerned and confused, helped the woman to her feet. She stood but seemed unsteady, as if she unsure how to walk on solid ground, and took her to the nearest village, where the local physician, Dr. Edmund Price, examined her. Dr. Price documented his findings carefully. The woman appeared to be in her mid to late 30s, suffering from severe dehydration, malnutrition, exposure, and what he described as a profound disturbance of the mental faculties. She had numerous small cuts and abrasions on her feet and hands, consistent with walking on rough terrain. Her skin showed evidence of extended sun exposure, but remarkably, she had no serious injuries, no broken bones, no signs of drowning or near drowning, no infections. The woman continued speaking in those strange, disconnected fragments. Dr. Price recorded several of her utterances. "The boundary is thinner than waves. I walked where ships sink, counting backwards from the surface. They showed me the roots beneath." No one in the village recognized her. She carried no identification. She couldn't or wouldn't say who she was or where she had come from. The local constable was notified, and a description of the mysterious woman was circulated to nearby towns. It took 4 days for someone to make the connection. The impossible identification. On the morning of October 6th, a merchant sailor who had worked on the HMS Triumph 2 years earlier happened to see the description of the mysterious woman found on the Cornwall coast. Something about the description, the age, the bearing, the references to ships and water even in her confused state, made him wonder. He traveled to the village and asked to see the woman. The moment he saw her, despite her drastically changed appearance, he was certain this was Captain Amelia Worthington, the commander of the Triumph who had been lost at sea 3 weeks earlier. But that was impossible. The Triumph had been in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when Captain Worthington disappeared. Even if she had somehow survived being swept overboard, even if she had managed to stay alive in the frigid ocean, even if she had been picked up by another vessel, how could she possibly have ended up on the Cornwall coast, hundreds of miles from any logical location? The merchant sailor sent an urgent telegram to First Mate Blackwell, who had returned to Liverpool with the Triumph. Blackwell traveled immediately to Cornwall, and when he saw the woman, he confirmed the identification without hesitation. This was definitely Captain Amelia Worthington. The news spread rapidly. The woman who had been declared lost at sea, who had been presumed drowned, who had been mourned by family and colleagues, was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. The questions she couldn't answer. Over the following weeks, as Amelia slowly recovered some of her physical strength, she was interviewed repeatedly by maritime authorities, physicians, journalists, and investigators trying to understand what had happened to her. Her sister Margaret came to stay with her, hoping familiar faces and surroundings would help restore her memory and clarity. But Amelia couldn't provide answers. Or rather, the answers she provided made no sense. When asked what happened after she was swept from the bridge, Amelia would say things like, "I went down where the pressure changes color, where the cold burns, where time flows differently." When asked how she survived in the ocean for 3 weeks, she replied, "I didn't swim, I walked. Beneath the waves there are paths that the drowned know. They showed me." When asked how she reached the Cornwall coast, she said distance is different down there. 100 miles or 1,000. It doesn't matter when you're walking the roots beneath. Medical experts examined her extensively. Some suggested she had suffered severe trauma to the head during the storm, resulting in amnesia and hallucinations. Others proposed that she had been in a state of delirium from exposure and starvation, and her brain had constructed false memories to explain experiences it couldn't process. A few physicians whispered about genuine mental illness, that the trauma of her experience had broken her mind. But none of these explanations could account for the simple, undeniable facts. Amelia Worthington had been in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on September 11. She was found on the Cornwall coast on October 2. That was 3 weeks and hundreds of miles of ocean. How? The physical evidence that didn't help. Investigators tried to trace Amelia's journey using physical evidence. The clothes she was wearing when found, the man's coat and the undergarment were examined. The coat was determined to be a working fisherman's garment, but no one could identify its original owner. The undergarment appeared to be Amelia's own from the Triumph, though how she had ended up wearing only that was unclear. Her feet showed extensive damage consistent with walking long distances on rough terrain, rocks, sand, broken shells. But there was also something strange. Embedded in some of the cuts on her feet were microscopic fragments that marine biologists identified as deep-sea organisms, species that live at depths of hundreds or even thousands of feet below the surface. Species that should never come into contact with human skin unless someone was diving in specialized equipment which didn't exist in 1879. How had these deep-sea organisms become embedded in the feet of a woman who claimed to have walked beneath the waves? The most disturbing physical evidence came from Amelia's hair. When examined under magnification, scientists found it contained salt crystals, as would be expected from someone exposed to seawater. But the salt had a strange property. When dissolved and tested, it showed mineral composition consistent with deep ocean water, the kind found thousands of feet below the surface, not the surface water where someone swept overboard would have been. Every piece of physical evidence raised more questions than it answered. The fragments of memory. As months passed, Amelia regained more of her normal mental functioning. The strange, disconnected speech patterns faded. She could hold coherent conversations. She remembered her identity, her life, her career. But her memory of the 3 weeks between September 11 and October 2 remained fragmentary and bizarre. In one interview with a maritime investigator, Amelia described what she could remember. "When the wave took me, I went under. I remember the cold. So cold it stops being cold and becomes something else. Pain maybe, or the absence of feeling. I remember sinking, deeper than I should have gone. And then I wasn't sinking anymore. I was standing, on sand, on rock, on things that shouldn't be solid but were." She continued, "There were shapes, structures, like buildings but not buildings, made of coral and bone and lost things. And there were others there. People, sailors, I don't know. They didn't speak with words, but I understood them. They showed me paths, routes through the dark. They said I could walk home if I followed the deep roads." When pressed on whether she believed this was real or a hallucination, Amelia was thoughtful. "I don't know. When you're drowning, when you're dying, does your mind create something to comfort you? Or do you glimpse something that exists but we never see because we stay on the surface? I walked for weeks through darkness and cold, but I never drowned. I emerged on a beach where I had no logical reason to be. How do you explain that?" The theories that failed. Victorian scientists, physicians, and investigators proposed numerous theories to explain Captain Worthington's disappearance and reappearance. Rescue and amnesia. Perhaps she was swept overboard, rescued by a passing vessel, suffered head trauma causing amnesia, and was eventually deposited near Cornwall. But no ship reported rescuing anyone, and the 3-week timeline made this unlikely. Clandestine survival. Maybe she washed ashore on a remote island or rocky outcrop, survived there for weeks, and eventually made her way to Cornwall through a series of events she couldn't remember. But the Atlantic has no uncharted islands in that region, and the mineral composition of the salt in her hair couldn't be explained this way. Deliberate deception. Some suggested Amelia had faked her own disappearance for unknown reasons, but this required believing she had planned an elaborate hoax, convinced her entire crew, and somehow traveled from the middle of the ocean to England without anyone seeing her, all while making herself appear half-starved and traumatized. Divine intervention. Religious authorities proposed that Amelia's survival was a miracle, divine protection of a righteous soul. But this didn't explain the physical evidence or her accounts of walking beneath the waves. Natural phenomena. Scientists suggested she might have been caught in unusual currents, rogue waves, or other rare oceanographic events that transported her in unexpected ways. But nothing in known ocean behavior could account for the timeline or the distance. Psychological break. Mental health experts proposed that the trauma had caused a complete psychological breakdown and everything she remembered was false. But this didn't explain how she got from the Atlantic to Cornwall. No theory adequately explained all the facts. Life after the impossible. Amelia Worthington never returned to sea as a captain. Maritime authorities, while sympathetic to her ordeal, quietly suggested that someone who had experienced such trauma and demonstrated such mental instability shouldn't be responsible for ships and crews. Her captain's license wasn't formally revoked, but she was strongly encouraged not to use it. Amelia accepted this with weary resignation. She settled in a small cottage on the Cornish coast, not far from where she had been found. She took work as a navigation consultant, helping other captains plan routes and understand weather patterns. She was brilliant at it. Her understanding of currents, winds, and ocean behavior was somehow even more refined than before her disappearance. She never married. She lived quietly, walking the coastal paths every day, always staring out at the ocean with an expression that mixed longing and fear. Her sister Margaret visited regularly, worried about her, but Amelia insisted she was content. She gave one final interview in 1895, 16 years after her disappearance. She was 54 years old then, weathered and gray, but still sharp-eyed. When asked if she had ever determined what really happened to her, she said, "I've stopped trying to make others believe me. I know what I experienced, even if I can't explain it in terms that satisfy investigators or scientists. The ocean is deeper and stranger than we understand. There are currents that flow beneath the currents we chart. There are places where the rules change. I went to one of those places. I was allowed to return. Many aren't. I don't know why I was spared, but I'm grateful." When asked if she ever missed being a captain, she smiled sadly, "Every day. But the sea gave me back my life. I can't ask for my old life too. That would be greedy." Amelia Worthington died in 1907 at the age of 66. She was buried in a small churchyard overlooking the sea, her grave marked with a simple stone, Captain Amelia Worthington, 1841-1907. She knew the ocean's secrets. The mystery that endures. Nearly 150 years later, the case of Captain Amelia Worthington remains unexplained. The documented facts are undeniable. She disappeared from a ship in the Atlantic on September 11, 1879, and was found on the Cornish coast on October 2, 1879. The timeline and the distance make no conventional sense. Modern researchers have examined the historical records, the testimony, the physical evidence. Some propose that Amelia was caught in a rare current system that could have moved her faster than expected. Others suggest she might have been picked up by smugglers or pirates who later deposited her on the coast. A few researchers point to the deep-sea organisms in her wounds and the unusual salt crystals in her hair as evidence that something genuinely anomalous occurred. But no modern theory explains everything. Just as Victorian investigators couldn't solve the mystery with their knowledge, we can't solve it with ours. What really happened to Captain Amelia Worthington during those 3 weeks? Did she hallucinate her experiences while surviving through luck and circumstances she couldn't remember? Or did she genuinely encounter something beneath the waves, something that exists outside our normal understanding of how the world works? What do you believe? We've laid out the historical facts, the testimonies, the theories. Captain Amelia Worthington was a real person. The HMS Triumph was a real ship. The disappearance and reappearance are documented in maritime records, newspaper accounts, and official investigations. But the explanation, that remains as mysterious today as it was in 1879. What do you think happened? Was it a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? A trick of memory and survival? Something supernatural or paranormal? Or perhaps even something stranger? A glimpse into aspects of our world that exist, but we rarely encounter. If Captain Worthington's mystery captivated you, help us share this incredible story. Like this video if you want more deep dives into historical mysteries that defy explanation. Subscribe for weekly stories from the edges of history, true accounts that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Share this with anyone fascinated by maritime mysteries, Victorian history, or stories of impossible survival. And most importantly, drop a comment with your theory about what really happened to Captain Worthington. Natural phenomenon, psychological survival mechanism, something supernatural or paranormal, or perhaps even something stranger, a glimpse into aspects of our world that exist but we rarely encounter. If Captain Worthington's mystery captivated you, help us share this incredible story. Remember, the ocean keeps its secrets, but sometimes, just sometimes, it returns those it has taken. Changed, mysterious, carrying knowledge we can't quite grasp. Captain Amelia Worthington walked paths beneath the waves that we may never understand. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be.